He left the safe open on purpose, not by mistake. The millionaire wanted to know if the woman cleaning his mansion was honest or just another person waiting to steal from him. For years, Michael Scott had trusted no one. Everyone he loved had taken something from him: money, loyalty, or peace. But that morning, when he left the safe wide open and turned on the hidden cameras, he didn't know the maid he was testing, Rebecca Johnson, would soon teach him the meaning of true honesty in a way that would break him to tears. He left the safe open on purpose, not by mistake. Michael Scott sat alone in his mansion office, staring at the large metal door that guarded everything he had left in life. Cash, gold, property deeds, and memories of a past that once made him proud. The mansion was silent, so silent that even the sound of his slow breath seemed too loud. It was the kind of silence that came from years of mistrust, years of betrayal, and a heart that had grown tired of people. Michael wasn't always like this. Once, he was the man people admired in Texas, the millionaire who built a shipping empire from nothing. His name appeared in newspapers, his photo on magazine covers, his speeches shared at business conferences. But wealth came with wolves. His son tried to have him declared unfit to take over his company, his daughter disappeared with his money, and even his closest doctor forged treatment bills behind his back. Everyone took something, leaving him alone with walls, security cameras, and memories of his late wife, Grace. Grace was the only person who ever made the mansion feel alive. She used to fill the air with the smell of cinnamon bread every Sunday, singing softly while she arranged wildflowers on the table. When cancer took her, it took more than her life, it took Michael's peace. Since then, he no longer trusted anyone, not even the people who smiled the most. The mansion, standing tall on the edge of Austin, had 20 rooms, long hallways, and marble floors that echoed loneliness. Michael spent most of his days behind locked doors, drinking coffee at 6 in the morning, checking emails he never replied to, and watching the security screens for hours. Each worker he hired lasted only a few days before being fired or quitting. Either they talked too much, asked too many questions, or looked at something they shouldn't have. But things were different now. His body had grown weak. His hands sometimes trembled when he held his coffee cup. One morning, he looked around and realized he couldn't manage everything alone. He needed help, even if that meant letting a stranger into his world again. So he called a staffing agency in Dallas. His voice was firm but tired as he gave them his list of rules. No criminal record, no social media, no gossip, no curiosity, no lies. He wanted someone invisible, someone who worked quietly and never asked personal questions. After hours, the agency sent him 3 profiles. 2 of them looked like everyone else he had fired before, but the third one caught his attention. Her name was Rebecca Johnson, 27 years old, born and raised in Houston. Her record was clean, her work experience solid, her photo simple. No heavy makeup, no proud smile, just calm eyes that seemed to understand silence. Her file said she was disciplined and driven by purpose. Michael doubted it. People always sounded perfect on paper. But something about her stayed in his mind. When the morning came, the mansion gates opened for the first time in weeks. A small city bus stopped outside, and a young black woman stepped down, holding a plain handbag. Rebecca walked calmly toward the mansion, her posture straight, her uniform neat, her face calm. Michael watched through the camera feed as she pressed the gate bell and waited. No restlessness, no fear, just quiet respect. When he opened the door, she greeted him softly, not smiling too much, not trying to impress. "Good morning, sir," she said. "May I come in?" He nodded and led her inside. The air inside the mansion was heavy with dust and silence. The sunlight coming through the window made the empty hallways glow faintly. Michael studied her as they walked. She didn't stare at the golden decorations or the grand staircase. She didn't act surprised by the size of the house. When they reached the sitting room, she asked one question. "The library, sir, should I dust only the shelves or also arrange the books?" He froze for a moment. No one had ever asked that before. Most workers asked about pay or breaks, but she cared about doing the job right. "Just dust," he said slowly. "Nothing moves in that room." She nodded, wrote it down in a small notebook, and continued to ask simple, respectful questions about cleaning routines. When the interview ended, she thanked him quietly and left. For a long moment, Michael stood by the window, watching her walk away down the path. There was something peaceful about her, something that didn't belong to the world he knew. For the first time in years, he didn't feel angry after meeting someone new. But that didn't mean he trusted her. That night, while the house slept, Michael couldn't stop thinking about Rebecca. He remembered her calm eyes, her steady voice, her lack of greed. Still, he told himself trust was a fool's game. People pretended until they found your weakness. He needed proof, something to show him she was different. So before her first day of work, he went into the east wing and unlocked the heavy metal door of his private office. Inside stood a large silver safe, filled with stacks of cash, gold, and documents. He took a deep breath, placed the safe's code slip on the table beside it, and left the door slightly open. The trap was set. He then went to the surveillance room, turned on the screens, and waited. The cameras covered every hallway, every corner. At exactly 8 in the morning, Rebecca arrived. Michael watched as she entered through the front door and began cleaning quietly. Her movements were slow and steady, her focus on her work. Hour after hour, she didn't look around. She dusted, arranged, and polished with care. Michael leaned forward, his fingers tightening on the desk. Soon she would find the open safe. Soon he would know who she really was. The clock ticked softly, and Michael whispered under his breath, "Let's see what you do when no one is watching." Rebecca arrived at the mansion the next morning, just as the sun broke over the quiet streets of Austin. The air was cool, the wind soft against her face. She looked up at the tall iron gates before walking through. The mansion stood like a sleeping giant, still and guarded, its red brick walls glowing faintly under the light. She didn't know that inside those walls, a test had already been prepared for her. Michael Scott sat in his small surveillance room, eyes fixed on the glowing screens. Every camera showed a different part of the mansion. Every corner watched. He leaned back in his chair, silent, a cup of black coffee untouched beside him. For the first time in a long while, he wasn't sure if he wanted to be proven right or wrong. Rebecca entered quietly, her shoes making soft sounds on the marble floor. She tied her apron tighter around her waist and took a slow breath before beginning her day. Cleaning wasn't just a job for her, it was peace. Each sweep of the broom, each movement of her hand, helped her forget the noise of the world outside. She started with the sitting room, wiping dust from the table and adjusting the curtains so sunlight could spill inside. Michael watched her every move from the screen. She worked neatly, not rushing, not distracted. For almost an hour, she didn't step into the east wing where his private office was. But eventually, she made her way there. Michael leaned forward, his heart heavy with unease. He watched as Rebecca slowly approached the long hallway that led to the office. Her soft footsteps echoed faintly against the marble tiles. The open safe sat inside, glowing faintly under the ceiling light. The code slip lay on the table beside it, waiting like bait. Rebecca stopped at the doorway. She saw it immediately, the open door, the stacks of money, the gold boxes shining under the light. For a moment, she stood frozen, her hand still holding a feather duster. Her throat went dry. The thought came without warning, what would happen if she just took a little? One bundle could fix so much. In her mind, She saw her mother's face. Her family's small grocery store back in Houston had been struggling for months. She had been trying to send money home, but it was never enough. Every night, her mother called crying, worried about the store, about losing their only income. Rebecca blinked hard and took a small step back. Michael whispered to himself, "Go on, show me who you really are." But she didn't move forward. Instead, she pulled out her phone, dialed a number, and held it to her ear. Michael zoomed in on the screen, reading her lips carefully. She was calling his secretary. "Ma'am," Rebecca said softly, "this is Rebecca Johnson. I just started working here today. I found Mr. Scott's safe open in the East Wing. I'm not sure what happened. Should I lock it or wait for instructions?" Her voice was calm but respectful. On the other end, the secretary sounded surprised. She told her to stay nearby until she could reach Michael. Rebecca nodded and ended the call. She placed her phone back in her pocket and stood quietly by the door. Michael stared at the screen in disbelief. No panic, no greed, no attempt to hide anything. Just honesty. It was something he hadn't seen in years. He almost smiled, but he reminded himself not to fall for appearances. People could pretend. They could act pure when they knew someone was watching. Just then, Rebecca's phone buzzed again. She looked down and answered quickly. Michael watched her face change as she listened. Her eyes filled with tears, her lips trembled, and her hand shook slightly. He could tell it wasn't good news. Her mother's voice cracked through the phone. "They're going to shut down the store by the end of the week if we don't pay $38,000, Rebecca. We'll lose everything." Rebecca covered her mouth, her body shaking as tears rolled down her cheeks. "Mama, please don't cry," she said softly. "I'll find a way, I promise." When the call ended, she stood still for a long time. The safe was right there, the money within reach. No one would know. Michael Scott was a millionaire. He wouldn't even notice if a few bundles went missing. Her family's entire future could be saved in seconds. The silence pressed heavy around her. The light from the safe glowed faintly across her face, and her tears sparkled in the brightness. Her hand moved a little, as if to reach for the table. Michael's heart tightened as he watched. He leaned closer to the screen. "This is it," he whispered. "This is where they all fail." But then Rebecca stopped. She closed her eyes and whispered to herself, "No, this isn't right. My mother didn't raise me to steal." She wiped her tears with the back of her hand, then walked inside the room. Her steps were slow, her breathing heavy. She reached for the slip of paper with the code on it, but instead of using it to open the safe wider, she typed in a random set of numbers. The safe beeped once and locked. Rebecca folded the real code gently and placed it into her apron pocket. Then she sat in a nearby chair, her hands covering her face as she cried quietly. She didn't cry because she regretted her choice. She cried because it had taken everything inside her to make it. Michael sat frozen, watching the screen. He couldn't believe what he had just seen. For years, he believed no one could resist temptation. He had been sure that honesty no longer existed in this world. But the maid sitting in his hallway had just proved him wrong. He turned off the sound and leaned back slowly, his chest heavy with something he hadn't felt in a long time. It wasn't anger, it wasn't suspicion, it was something softer, something he barely recognized. Trust. For the first time in years, he trusted someone. The mansion grew quiet again that evening. The golden light of sunset fell through the tall glass windows, painting the marble floor in shades of orange and gray. Rebecca was still sitting near the locked safe, her eyes red, her apron wrinkled, her spirit heavy but calm. The sound of her soft breathing echoed faintly through the empty hallway. She hadn't moved for hours. In the surveillance room, Michael Scott had not left his chair. He watched her through the screen, his hands trembling slightly as he turned the dial on the monitor. The woman on the screen wasn't what he expected. No greed, no lies, no fear of being caught, just honesty and pain. He whispered to himself, how could someone like her still exist? The last time Michael had seen anyone cry in that house was the night Grace died. He could still remember how her weak hands held his and told him to never let bitterness destroy his heart. He didn't listen then. But watching Rebecca lock that safe and sit by it like a guardian stirred something inside him that he thought was long gone. By 6 in the evening, the cameras caught her standing up slowly. She brushed her face, fixed her apron, and looked around to make sure the hallway was clean. Then she turned toward the sound of footsteps. Michael was walking down the stairs. It was the first time she had seen him that day. He looked tired but composed, his gray hair slightly messy, his black suit perfectly buttoned. Rebecca straightened herself and spoke softly. "Good evening, sir. I didn't know you were still home." Michael didn't answer right away. He stood in front of her, his hands in his pockets, studying her face. "You're still here," he said quietly. Rebecca nodded. "Yes, sir. I called your secretary earlier. I found your safe open. I stayed to make sure no one came near it." He looked at her with unreadable eyes. "I know," he said. She blinked in confusion. "You know?" "I saw everything," Michael replied. "There are cameras all over this house. I watched how you handled it." For a long moment, Rebecca stood silent. She didn't look angry or embarrassed. She just looked down at her hands, then back up at him. "I understand," she said softly. "This is your home. You have every right to protect it." Her words were calm, but her voice carried sadness. Michael noticed it. He had expected her to be defensive, maybe even upset. Instead, she accepted the truth with grace. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a white envelope. "Inside is a check for $50,000, he said. "This is yours. You earned it." Rebecca stared at the envelope, her breath catching for a moment. Then she shook her head. "I can't accept that, sir." Michael frowned. "Why not?" "Because doing what is right shouldn't be paid for," she replied softly. "If I take that, it will feel like I did the right thing to get money, not because it was right." Her words hit him like a wave. For years, he had believed that everyone had a price, that loyalty was bought, not earned. But this woman in front of him was proof of something different. "You could have changed your life today," he said quietly. "That money could have been yours, and no one would have known." Rebecca smiled faintly, her eyes glistening. "But I would have known. And that would be enough to destroy me." Michael took a slow breath. "Who taught you to be like this?" She hesitated, then said softly, "My parents. My mother used to tell me that honesty is the one thing no one can steal from you. We didn't have much growing up, but she always said that character is wealth." He nodded slowly. Her words reminded him of something Grace once said years ago. "People forget," Grace had told him, "that money can buy respect, but not peace." For a moment, he could almost smell the faint trace of her cinnamon bread again. Rebecca's voice broke the silence. "Sir, may I ask something?" Michael nodded. "Why did you test me?" she asked quietly. "Was it because of my race? Or because you don't trust anyone anymore?" He froze for a moment. Her question hit deeper than he expected. "No," he said at last. "It's not about that. I've been betrayed too many times. By people who smiled to my face and stole behind my back. I stopped believing anyone could be different." Rebecca looked down, nodding slowly. "I understand," she said softly. "Pain changes people. It makes us afraid to hope again." The room fell silent again. The ticking clock on the wall filled the gap between their breaths. Michael finally took a step closer and said, "There's something I need to tell you." Rebecca raised her head, waiting. "Years ago, I donated money to hospitals around Texas," he said slowly. "I didn't tell anyone. I didn't want the attention. I just did it quietly. I never knew who the patients were. Rebecca's lips parted slightly. Her hands trembled. You donated to hospitals? He nodded. Why? Tears filled her eyes again. Because one of those donations saved my cousin's life, she said softly. He needed heart surgery, and the hospital told us an anonymous donor covered the full cost. When I applied to work here and saw your name on the donor list, I knew it was you. Michael's breath caught. He stared at her, speechless. He had helped hundreds of people over the years, but never thought he would meet one of them face to face. Rebecca wiped her tears and continued. That's why I wanted to work for you. I wasn't here for money. I was here to serve the man who once saved someone I loved. Michael couldn't speak. His throat tightened, his chest heavy with emotion. He turned away for a moment, trying to compose himself. When he finally looked back, his voice was quiet but firm. You reminded me today that there's still good in this world, Rebecca. Something I forgot a long time ago. She looked down humbly, her tears falling freely now. He placed the envelope on the desk beside her. Keep it or leave it, the choice is yours. But know this, you've already given me something no money can buy. Rebecca didn't move. She simply whispered, Thank you, sir. Michael looked at her and smiled for the first time in years. It was small, gentle, almost unsure, but it was real. The morning light entered the mansion slowly, slipping between the long curtains and falling across the polished floor. For years, this house had been filled with shadows, untouched and cold. But today, something was different. The air felt lighter, almost alive. Michael Scott sat in the study, staring at the same screens that had once kept him company in silence. Every camera showed Rebecca cleaning quietly, her soft movements steady and graceful. He turned the monitors off one by one. For the first time in a decade, he no longer needed to watch anyone. He leaned back in his chair and closed his eyes. Grace's voice echoed in his memory, the voice that once made him smile. Don't let the world turn your heart to stone, she had said. There are still good people out there. He had buried that thought with her years ago, but now, sitting in that same chair, he realized she had been right all along. At exactly 9 in the morning, Rebecca knocked gently on the study door. Come in, Michael said. His voice was softer than usual. She stepped inside, holding her notebook close to her chest. Good morning, sir, she greeted politely. Michael looked at her, his expression calm and thoughtful. Good morning, Rebecca. Sit, please. She sat carefully on the edge of the chair across from him, her hands folded neatly. The room was quiet for a moment, only the sound of the grandfather clock ticking behind them. I've been thinking about what happened yesterday, Michael began. About what you did, and what you said. Rebecca looked down slightly, unsure how to respond. I only did what anyone should do, sir. He smiled faintly. That's what you think, but I've lived long enough to know not everyone would have done what you did. You had a reason to take that money. You had pain. You had need, yet you chose honesty. Rebecca shook her head gently. My mother always said honesty is like air. You don't always notice it, but you can't live without it. Michael's eyes softened. Your mother raised a remarkable daughter. Rebecca smiled faintly. She tried her best, sir. For a moment, they both sat quietly. Then Michael opened the top drawer of his desk and pulled out a dark leather folder. He placed it gently in front of her. Do you know what this is? He asked. Rebecca shook her head. It's called the Silver Heart Foundation, he said. I created it years ago after Grace died. It was meant to help families who couldn't afford medical care, to give people hope. But I never trusted anyone to run it. Until now. Rebecca's eyes widened. Sir, I don't understand. Michael leaned forward slightly. I'm giving it to you, Rebecca. I want you to lead it. You have the heart, the honesty, and the courage that this world desperately needs. She stared at him, speechless. But I'm just a housekeeper. I don't have experience for something like this. He shook his head. You have what experience can't teach. You have truth inside you. The rest, I can help you learn. Tears filled her eyes as she looked down at the folder, her hands trembling. Why me? She whispered. Because you reminded me what it means to trust again, he said quietly. You reminded me what it means to be human. Rebecca pressed her lips together, trying to stop her tears, but they fell anyway. I don't know what to say, she murmured. Say yes, Michael said simply. She looked at him, still crying, and nodded slowly. Yes, sir. For a long moment, they sat there in silence. It wasn't the silence of suspicion that once filled the house, it was peace, the kind of peace that grows from forgiveness and truth. Michael stood up and walked to the window, watching the garden outside. The sun was brighter now, and for the first time, he saw life in the flowers Grace had planted years ago. Do you know something, Rebecca? He said softly. You brought this house back to life. Rebecca stood too, still holding the folder to her chest. You brought it back, sir. I just did my job. He turned toward her, smiling gently. No, Rebecca. You did much more than that. She smiled shyly, her voice small but warm. Thank you, sir. I'll do my best. I know you will, he replied. Later that day, Rebecca left the mansion for a short walk. She paused at the front steps, looking up at the tall windows. The house that once felt like a fortress now looked almost welcoming. She wiped a tear from her cheek and smiled softly before walking down the path. Inside, Michael sat back in his chair, feeling lighter than he had in years. He looked at Grace's old photo on the desk and whispered, You were right, my love. There are still good people out there. That evening, as the Texas sunset filled the sky with shades of gold and red, Michael wrote a short letter to Rebecca. He placed it inside the folder she had taken home. It read, Rebecca, trust is the rarest form of wealth. You gave it back to me when I thought I had lost it forever. Use this foundation to give others what you gave me hope. Always, Michael. When Rebecca opened it later that night, tears filled her eyes again. She held the letter to her heart and smiled through her tears. Somewhere deep inside, both of them had found what money could never buy: healing, trust, and the reminder that goodness still exists in this world. And so, the mansion that was once silent finally had a story worth remembering. A story that began with suspicion, but ended with faith. Because sometimes, the richest people are not the ones who keep their safes open, but the ones who open their hearts instead. Dear viewers, this story reminds us that real wealth is not found in money, but in honesty, kindness, and trust. Rebecca's choice proved that doing the right thing, even when no one is watching, can change a life forever. And Michael's heart showed us that it's never too late to believe in people again. Tell us in the comments where you're watching from, and what lesson this story taught you. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more emotional stories that touch the heart. If you want more stories like this, comment "more stories" below, and you'll be the first to see the next one. Now, let me ask you, would you pass a test like Rebecca? Do you think money can truly measure honesty? And what would you have done if you were in her place?